Sometimes the deepest loneliness comes not from being alone, but from believing you'll never find home in someone's heart again. After losing the love of his life over 10 years ago, Eli Zook thought his story was finished. The 62-year-old Amish blacksmith had settled into a quiet life in Pennsylvania Dutch country, content with his work and his faith. Then a 7-year-old girl named Maisie walked up to him with the kind of innocent boldness only children possess. "You need a wife, and my mom needs someone kind," she declared, completely unaware she was about to turn two broken hearts toward healing. Her mother Claire, a nurse starting over after a painful marriage, never expected her daughter's matchmaking to lead to something real. But what happens when two people who thought love was behind them discover it might just be beginning? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Zook property as Eli stepped into his blacksmith shop, the familiar scent of coal and iron greeting him like an old friend. At 62, his hands bore the weathered marks of 4 decades spent shaping. Metal, each callus a testament to countless horseshoes forged, wagon wheels repaired, and farm implements restored to life. The rhythmic clang of hammer against anvil had become the soundtrack of his existence, steady, purposeful, and solitary. His workshop stood apart from the main farmhouse, a deliberate distance that had grown more meaningful in the 11 years. Since Sarah's passing, the house felt too large now, too quiet, filled with memories that both comforted and haunted him. Here, among the tools and flames, he could lose himself in the ancient dance of fire and metal, where the only conversation required was between his hands and his craft. Eli lit the forge, watching the coals catch and glow with practiced patience. The Amish way taught that hurried work was poor work, and at his age he had learned the wisdom of letting things unfold in their proper time. Yet lately, something restless had taken root in his chest, a longing he couldn't quite name and didn't dare examine too closely. The small wooden box on his workbench caught the morning light. Inside lay Sarah's wedding ring, a simple band of gold that had adorned her finger for 31 years. He touched the box each morning, a ritual that had begun as grief and evolved into something more complex. Sarah had been gone longer now than some marriages lasted, yet the ring remained unworn, waiting for a purpose that might never come. "Good morning, Eli?" Bishop Miller's voice carried across the yard, accompanied by the crunch of gravel under buggy wheels. The elderly man had made these visits more frequent since Sarah's death, checking on his spiritual flock with the persistence of a shepherd who knew his sheep too well. "Bishop," Eli stepped outside, wiping his hands on his leather apron. "You're out early today. The Lord's work doesn't keep regular hours." Miller's eyes, sharp despite his 78 years, studied Eli with the kind of attention reserved for souls in need of guidance. "I wanted to speak with you about something." They stood in the comfortable silence that came with decades of friendship. Miller had officiated at Eli and Sarah's wedding, had been present for every significant moment of their life together, and had spoken the words over Sarah's grave that committed her body to the earth and her soul to God's keeping. "There's talk in the community," Miller began carefully, "about the new nurse at the clinic, Claire Patterson. She's been treating our people with respect, learning our ways." Eli nodded. He'd heard the name mentioned at Sunday services. The Amish community was cautiously accepting of outside medical help when needed, but trust came slowly and had to be earned through actions, not words. "She has a daughter," Miller continued, "a bright child who asks many questions about our way of life. The girl seems drawn to our community." "Children often are," Eli replied, uncertain where this conversation was leading. "They see the horses and the simple ways without the complications adults bring to everything." Miller smiled, an expression that held layers of understanding. "Yes, they do. Sometimes children see truths that we, in our wisdom, overlook." Before Eli could respond, the sound of voices drifted across from the road. A woman's voice, gentle but firm, and a child's higher pitch, animated with the kind of enthusiasm that only 7-year-olds could muster. "That must be them now," Miller observed. "Claire brings her daughter this way when she visits the Hochstetler farm. Young Samuel injured his arm last week." Eli watched as 2 figures came into view. The woman walked with the measured pace of someone accustomed to being needed, her dark hair pulled back in a practical style. She wore simple clothes, not Amish, but respectful of their customs. Beside her, a small girl with blonde curls skipped along, her attention caught by everything around her. The child stopped suddenly, her gaze fixed on Eli's workshop. Even from a distance, he could see her pointing, asking questions that her mother answered in patient tones. There was something about the scene, the tenderness between mother and daughter, the way the morning light caught their hair, that stirred memories in Eli he'd tried to keep buried. Sarah had wanted children. They'd tried for years, hoped and prayed and trusted in God's timing. When it became clear that children weren't part of their path, they'd poured their parental instincts into their community, becoming the aunt and uncle to every child in their district. Sarah had a gift with the little ones, a way of making each feel special and heard. "Eli," Miller's voice brought him back to the present. "Perhaps you should introduce yourself. It's our way to be neighborly." But before Eli could respond, the child had broken away from her mother and was walking directly toward them with the fearless curiosity that only children possessed. Her mother called after her, but the girl was already crossing the yard, her eyes bright with interest. "Are you the man who makes horseshoes?" she asked without preamble, stopping just close enough to be polite, but far enough to make a quick escape if needed. "I am," Eli replied, struck by her directness. "Among other things. My mum said you're the best blacksmith in the county." The girl studied him with unsettling intensity. "She said the Amish people respect your work because you do it right. Your mother is kind to say so." Eli glanced toward Claire Patterson, who had approached more cautiously. Up close, she was younger than he'd expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with intelligent eyes and the slightly worn look of someone who'd carried heavy burdens. "I'm sorry," Claire said, reaching for her daughter's hand. "Maisie doesn't know about stranger danger." "He's not a stranger, Mom," Maisie protested. "Bishop Miller is here, and you said the bishop knows everyone worth knowing." Miller chuckled. "Out of the mouths of babes. Claire Patterson, this is Eli Zook." "Eli," Claire, "has been a blessing to our community these past few months." "It's nice to meet you," Claire said, her voice carrying a slight southern accent that spoke of origins far from Pennsylvania. "I've heard wonderful things about your craftsmanship, and I've heard you've been helpful to our people," Eli replied. "Medical care can be difficult for us to navigate in the outside world. I try to be respectful of your customs," she said. "Medicine is medicine, but trust has to be earned." There was something in her tone, a weariness that spoke of hard-won wisdom, that resonated with Eli. He recognized the look of someone who'd rebuilt their life from difficult circumstances. Maisie had wandered to the edge of the workshop, peering inside with undisguised fascination. "Could I watch you make something sometime?" she asked. "I promise I wouldn't touch anything." "Maisie," her mother warned, "Mr. Zook is very busy." "It's no trouble," Eli found himself saying. "Children should learn about honest work." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise Claire. He wasn't given to spontaneous invitations, especially to outsiders. Yet something about the child's genuine interest and her mother's respectful manner had touched a part of him he'd thought permanently closed. "That's very kind," Claire said carefully, "but I wouldn't want to impose." "It wouldn't be an imposition," Miller interjected. "Our young people often watch Eli work. It's how they learn." "Are you going to make something today?" Maisie asked, already moving toward the workshop entrance. Eli looked at the child's eager face, then at her mother's more cautious expression. Something in Claire's eyes, a mixture of hope and wariness, reminded him of a deer at the edge of A clearing, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. I have some horseshoes to finish, he said slowly. Nothing too exciting. Everything's exciting when you don't know how it works, Maisie replied, with the philosophy only children could deliver with complete seriousness. Claire laughed, a sound that was warm and genuine. She's not wrong about that. For the next hour, Eli found himself explaining the basics of blacksmithing to an audience of 3. Maisie asked endless questions, her curiosity untempered by any sense of what might be inappropriate to ask. Claire listened with the attention of someone genuinely interested in learning, not just being polite. Miller observed it all with the satisfied air of someone watching a plan unfold. As Eli heated the iron and began shaping a horseshoe, he became aware of something he hadn't felt in years, the pleasure of sharing his knowledge. Sarah used to say that his face changed when he talked about his work, that he became animated in a way that transformed him from a quiet man into a passionate teacher. The metal has to be hot enough to shape, but not so hot it becomes weak, he explained, holding the glowing iron with long tongs. It's about understanding the material, working with it rather than forcing it. Like people, Claire observed quietly. Eli glanced at her, struck by the insight. Yes, he said, like people. When the horseshoe was finished and cooling, Maisie examined it with the reverence due a work of art. It's perfect, she declared. The horse is going to love it. How can you tell if a horse loves its shoes? Eli asked, genuinely curious about her reasoning. Because they'll walk differently, she said confidently. When something fits right, you can tell. My mom says that's how you know when you've found where you belong. Everything just fits. The simple wisdom of her words hung in the air. Claire's cheeks colored slightly, suggesting her daughter's observation struck closer to home than comfortable. We should be going, Claire said, checking a practical watch on her wrist. I have patients to see this afternoon. Thank you for letting me watch, Maisie said to Eli with the formal courtesy of a child who'd been taught proper manners. Could I come back sometime? Eli found himself nodding before he'd consciously decided to answer. You're welcome any time. As they prepared to leave, Maisie turned back one more time. Mr. Zook, do you live in that big house all by yourself? Maisie, her mother said sharply, embarrassment clear in her voice. It's all right, Eli said. Yes, I do. The child considered this with the seriousness of someone half her age. That must be lonely. The simple statement, delivered without pity or judgment, hit Eli with unexpected force. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. Sometimes, he admitted, surprised by his own honesty. Maisie nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. Then she slipped her hand into her mother's and skipped away, already chattering about everything she'd learned. Claire paused at the edge of the yard. Thank you, she said quietly. That was very kind of you. Maisie doesn't have many opportunities to see craftsmanship like yours. She's a bright child, Eli replied. You're raising her well. Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of shared values, perhaps, or simply the recognition of two people trying to do right by the lives they'd been given after they'd gone. Miller lingered, his observant eyes missing nothing. Interesting family, he said mildly. They seem nice enough, Eli replied, suddenly busy with organizing tools that were already perfectly organized. The child has a gift for asking the right questions. Eli paused in his unnecessary tidying. She's curious. Nothing wrong with that. No, Miller agreed. Nothing wrong at all. Sometimes the Lord uses the most unexpected messengers to deliver the messages we need to hear. With that cryptic observation, the bishop climbed back into his buggy and drove away, leaving Eli alone with his thoughts and the lingering scent of Claire Patterson's gentle perfume. That evening, as Eli sat in his too large house, eating a simple supper, he found himself thinking about Maisie's question. The child had seen something he'd worked years to hide, the loneliness that had become as much a part of his daily routine as lighting the forge or checking the horses. He opened the small wooden box and lifted out Sarah's ring, holding it up to catch the lamplight. For 11 years, he'd kept it safe, a talisman against forgetting and a barrier against moving forward. Tonight, for the first time, he wondered if there might be another purpose for it. Not as a monument to the past, but as a bridge to whatever might come next. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. At 62, was it possible that his story wasn't finished after all? 3 days later, Eli was deep in the meditative rhythm of his work when a small voice cut through the steady ringing of hammer on anvil. "Mr. Zook?" He looked up to find Maisie, standing at the entrance to his workshop, her blonde curls catching the morning sunlight. She wore a simple blue dress and carried herself with the determined air of someone on an important mission. "Good morning, Maisie," Eli said, setting down his hammer. "Does your mother know where you are?" "She's at the clinic, helping Mrs. Stoltzfus with her baby," Maisie replied, matter-of-factly. "I told her I was going to play in the field, but I really wanted to talk to you about something important." Eli felt a flutter of concern. 7-year-olds rarely wandered off alone in his community, but then again, Claire wasn't Amish and might have different ideas about childhood independence. "What's so important that it couldn't wait?" he asked gently, wiping his hands on his apron. Maisie stepped closer, her expression serious in the way only children could manage when they believed they were solving adult problems. "I've been thinking about what you said the other day, about being lonely sometimes. Have you now?" Eli tried to keep his tone neutral, though something in the child's intensity made him uneasy. "My mom is lonely too," Maisie announced. "She tries to hide it, but I can tell. She gets sad when she thinks I'm not looking, especially at night when she thinks I'm asleep." The directness of her observation caught Eli off guard. Children saw things adults worked hard to conceal, but Maisie seemed to possess an unusual degree of perception for someone so young. "I'm sorry to hear your mother is sad," Eli said carefully. "Moving to a new place can be difficult." "It's not just that," Maisie continued, warming to her subject. "She was sad before we moved here too. My dad—" She paused, her small face clouding. "My dad wasn't very nice to her. He never hit her or anything, but he made her feel small, like nothing she did was good enough." Eli's chest tightened. He'd suspected Claire carried some hurt, but hearing it confirmed by her daughter's innocent words stirred something protective in him. "That must have been hard for both of you," he said. "It was. But Mom is brave. She saved up money and made a plan, and we left when he was at work one day. We drove and drove until we found this place." Maisie's voice carried the pride of a child who admired her mother's courage. "Your mother sounds like a strong woman." "She is, but she's also tired of being strong all the time." Maisie stepped closer, close enough that Eli could see the earnest determination in her blue eyes. "That's why I came to talk to you." "Oh?" The child took a deep breath, as if preparing for the most important speech of her young life. "You need a wife, and my mom needs someone kind." The words hit Eli like a physical blow. He stared at the child, certain he'd misheard, but her expression remained serious and expectant. "Maisie," he began slowly, "that's not—" "I know you loved your wife who died," she interrupted, apparently having given this considerable thought. "Mom told me about her when I asked. But loving someone who's gone doesn't mean you can't love. Someone who's here. Mum says love isn't like pie. Sharing it doesn't make the pieces smaller." Eli found himself speechless. The child's simple logic cut through years of carefully constructed barriers with the efficiency of a sharp blade. "And Mom needs someone who understands that being hurt doesn't make you broken," Maisie continued. "Someone patient and kind who won't make her feel stupid for being scared sometimes. Someone like you, Maisie. I saw how you looked at each other," she said with the confidence of someone who'd made an important discovery. "And how you both smiled differently when you were talking. Real smiles, not the polite ones adults usually use." Eli's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his workbench, needing something solid to ground him. This child, this innocent messenger, had walked into his carefully ordered world and spoken truths he'd been afraid to acknowledge, even to himself. "It's not that simple," he managed. "Your mother and I, We come from very different worlds. So, you both like helping people. You both work hard. You're both sad about things that happened before, and you both were nicer when you were together than when you're by yourselves. Maisie's matter-of-fact tone made it sound like the most reasonable thing in the world. Before Eli could formulate a response, the sound of rapid footsteps on gravel announced Claire's arrival. Her voice carried across the yard, tight with worry and embarrassment. "Maisie Elizabeth Patterson, what do you think you're doing?" The child turned toward her mother's voice but didn't show any sign of remorse. "I was having an important conversation with Mr. Zook, Mum." Claire appeared at the workshop entrance, slightly out of breath and clearly agitated. Her hair had come loose from its practical ponytail, and her cheeks were flushed with exertion and mortification. "I am so sorry," she said to Eli. "Not quite." Meeting his eyes, Mrs. Hochstetler told me she saw Maisie heading this way. "I hope she wasn't bothering you." "She wasn't bothering me," Eli said truthfully, though bothering seemed an inadequate word for what had just transpired. "Good, because we were discussing—" Maisie began cheerfully. "Whatever you were discussing can wait," Claire interrupted firmly. "We need to get home. Now." Something in her mother's tone finally penetrated Maisie's confidence. The child looked between the two adults, her expression shifting to uncertainty. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked in a smaller voice. Claire's expression softened immediately. "No, honey, but you can't just wander off without telling me where you're really going, and you can't—" She glanced at Eli, her cheeks growing redder. "You can't bother people with personal questions." "But I thought, Maisie—" Claire's tone carried the weight of maternal authority. "Please go wait by the road. We'll talk about this at home." The child looked as if she wanted to argue, but something in her mother's expression convinced her otherwise. She walked slowly toward the road, her shoulders slumped with disappointment. In the awkward silence that followed, Claire finally met Eli's eyes. "I'm mortified," she said quietly. "I don't know what she said to you, but I want you to know that I had nothing to do with whatever conversation you had." "I believe you," Eli said. The honesty of her distress was evident, but so was something else. A flicker of curiosity about what her daughter might have said. Claire ran a hand through her disheveled hair. "She's been through a lot of changes lately. Sometimes I think she's trying to fix things that aren't her responsibility to fix. She's a perceptive child, too. Perceptive sometimes." Claire's smile was rueful. "She sees things I hope she's too young to understand." They stood in uncomfortable silence, both aware that something significant had shifted, but uncertain how to address it. The horseshoe Eli had been working on still lay on the anvil, cooling in the morning air. "Is that for the miller's mare?" Claire asked, clearly grasping for neutral ground. "It is. She threw a shoe yesterday." Eli was grateful for the safe topic. "Nothing serious, but it needs attention. Maisie was fascinated by the whole process when we were here before. She's never seen anything made by hand like that." "It's a dying art in many places," Eli observed. "Most people buy what they need. Now, instead of making it, there's something to be said for creating things with your own hands," Claire said. "It must be satisfying to see something useful take shape from raw materials." "It is." Eli found himself studying her face as she examined his work. There was genuine appreciation there, not just politeness. "Your daughter asked good questions the other day. Most children want to know about the fire and the sparks. She wanted to understand the why behind the how. She gets that from—" Claire began, then stopped abruptly. "From her mother, I'd guess," Eli finished gently. Their eyes met, and for a moment the awkwardness faded. Claire's expression grew thoughtful, as if she were seeing him clearly for the first time. "Mr. Zook," she said carefully, "I hope you know that whatever Maisie said—" "She said you were both lonely," Eli interrupted, surprising himself with his directness. "And that loneliness was something we might help each other with." Claire's breath caught. Oh my God. I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize for a child's honesty," Eli said quietly. "Sometimes children see truths that adults spend years avoiding." The silence that stretched between them was different now. charged with possibility and fraught with complications. Claire's hand moved to her throat, a nervous gesture that drew Eli's attention to the absence of any jewelry there. "I should go," she said finally. "Maisie's waiting, of course." But neither of them moved immediately. The moment hung between them, full of unspoken questions and careful considerations. "Claire," Eli said as she finally turned to leave, "yes, your daughter isn't wrong about everything." Claire stared at him for a long moment, her expression cycling through surprise, uncertainty, and something that might have been hope. "No," she said quietly, "I don't suppose she is." After they left, Eli stood alone in his workshop, staring at the cooling horseshoe. The child's words echoed in his mind, direct, honest, and impossibly complicated. In the space of 10 minutes, Maisie Patterson had dismantled 11 years of careful emotional distance and forced him to confront questions he'd convinced himself were no longer relevant. "You need a wife, and my mom needs someone kind." The simplicity of it was both terrifying and liberating. At 62, was it possible that his story of love wasn't finished? And if it wasn't, did he have the courage to find out what the next chapter might hold? The wooden toy horse took shape slowly under Eli's careful knife, each deliberate cut revealing the form hidden within the simple block of maple. He'd been working on it for 3 evenings now, telling himself it was merely a way to keep his hands busy during the long hours after supper. The truth, which he wasn't quite ready to admit, was more complicated. It had been a week since Maisie's startling declaration, a week of careful normalcy that felt anything but normal. Eli had thrown himself into his work with renewed intensity, accepting every job that came his way and inventing tasks that didn't strictly need doing. Yet despite his efforts to maintain routine, he found his thoughts drifting toward a pair of blue eyes, one set belonging to a precocious child, the other to her quietly courageous mother. The horse was nearly finished now, its simple lines capturing the essence of the gentle draft horses that pulled Amish buggies through the countryside. Maisie would love it, he was certain of that. The question was whether giving it to her was wise, or if it would only encourage the matchmaking instincts that had already caused enough disruption. A soft knock at his back door interrupted his contemplation. Eli set down his carving knife and walked through the house, surprised to find anyone calling so late in the evening. When he opened the door, Claire Patterson stood on his porch, her expression uncertain and apologetic. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," she began quickly. "I know this is presumptuous, but I was hoping, do you have a few minutes?" "Of course." Eli stepped aside to let her enter. "Is everything all right? Is Maisie?" "She's fine. She's at home. Finally asleep, after asking about a dozen questions about why horses need shoes, but people just need socks." Claire's smile was strained but genuine. "I wanted to talk to you about what happened the other day." Eli led her to his kitchen, the most comfortable room in the house, with its large wooden table and the lingering warmth from the wood stove. He gestured to a chair and poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot he always kept warm. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Claire continued, accepting the cup gratefully, "about what Maisie said, about the position she put us both in. She's a child," Eli said gently. "Children say things without understanding all the implications." "Do they?" Claire met his eyes over her coffee cup. "Sometimes I think she understands. More than I give her credit for. More than I want her to understand." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kitchen wrapped in the soft glow of lamplight. Eli found himself noticing details, the way Claire's hands wrapped around the warm cup, the tired lines around her eyes that spoke of too many long days, the careful way she held herself as if prepared for disappointment. "She told you about her father," Claire said finally. "It wasn't a question. Some of it." Claire nodded, staring into her coffee. "It wasn't a violent marriage. I want you to know that. David never laid a hand on either of us. But there are other ways to diminish someone, other ways to make them feel small and worthless." Eli waited, sensing she needed to say these things at her own pace. He was very successful, very intelligent, a surgeon in Atlanta. On paper, we looked perfect together. Her voice carried the weight of old pain, carefully, controlled. But he had this way of correcting everything I did, questioning every decision I made. Nothing I accomplished was ever quite enough, never done quite right. That must have been exhausting. It was, and the worst part was how gradually it happened, like water wearing away stone, so slowly you don't notice until one day you wake up and realize you've disappeared. Claire's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly around the cup. What made you leave? Maisie. The answer came without hesitation. I realized she was watching how he treated me, learning that this was normal, that this was how men were supposed to treat women. I couldn't let her grow up thinking she deserved to be made small. Eli felt a surge of respect for the woman sitting across from him. It took tremendous courage to rebuild a life from nothing, especially with a child depending on you. So you came here. I researched small communities where a nurse would be needed, places where we could start fresh. When I heard about the clinic here and how they worked with the Amish community, it seemed like a sign. Somewhere with strong values, where people still believed in taking care of each other. And have you found what you were looking for? Claire was quiet for a long moment, considering. More than I expected to, actually. The people here have been kinder than I dared hope. Your community especially has been generous in trusting me with their care. You've earned that trust. I hope so. She paused, then looked directly at him. Eli, I need you to know that I didn't encourage Maisie to say what she said. I would never presume. I know that. Eli's voice was firm. But I also need you to know that what she said wasn't entirely wrong. Claire's breath caught. What do you mean? Eli stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkened fields. I've been alone for 11 years. For most of that time, I believed I was meant to stay that way, that my chance at companionship had come and gone with Sarah. He turned back to face her, finding courage in her patient attention. But lately, I've been wondering if perhaps there's more to life than just getting through each day. If maybe God has other plans than the ones I've made for myself. Eli, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I just wanted you to know that your daughter's observation about loneliness, it wasn't misplaced. And her idea that we might help each other, it's not as impossible as it might seem. They looked at each other across the kitchen. Two people who'd learned to be careful with their hearts, trying to navigate the delicate space between honesty and wisdom. I'm scared, Claire admitted quietly. So am I. I don't know the first thing about your way of life, your customs, your faith, and I don't know anything about raising a modern English child, Eli countered, or about building something new when you're old enough to know how easily things can be lost. Claire smiled, a real smile this time. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Perhaps that's not necessarily a bad thing. Before either could lose courage, Eli walked to the carved horse he'd left on the counter. He picked it up, running his thumb over the smooth wood one final time, then held it out to Claire. For Maisie, he said simply. Claire took the toy, her fingers tracing the careful lines of its construction. You made this? It's not much, just something to keep my hands busy. In the evenings. It's beautiful. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She'll treasure this. I hope she'll understand what it means. What does it mean? Eli met her gaze steadily. That some things are worth the time it takes to create them properly, and that sometimes the most meaningful gifts come from unexpected places. Claire stood, clutching the wooden horse carefully. Thank you for this, and for being honest tonight. Thank you for trusting me with your story. As Eli walked her to the door, both of them seemed reluctant to end the evening. The conversation had shifted something between them, opened a door that had been carefully locked for years. Eli? Claire paused on the threshold. Yes? Would you like to have dinner with us tomorrow? Nothing fancy, just a simple meal, as friends. The word friends hung in the air, loaded with possibility and careful boundaries. I'd like that very much. After she left, Eli sat in his kitchen, for a long time, staring at the two coffee cups and thinking about courage, about the different forms it could take, the courage to leave a harmful situation, the courage to trust again, the courage to admit that loneliness wasn't necessarily a virtue. At 62, he was discovering that his capacity for hope hadn't diminished with age. If anything, it had deepened, tempered by experience and made more precious by the knowledge of how rare and fragile it could be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions about how two very different worlds might find common ground. But tonight, for the first time in 11 years, Eli Zook fell asleep thinking not about what he'd lost, but about what might yet be possible. The emergency call came at 2 a.m, jarring Claire from the deep sleep she'd finally learned to achieve since leaving Atlanta. Mrs. Hochstetler's voice on the phone was strained with worry. Her grandson had fallen from the barn loft and wasn't moving right. Claire was dressed and in her car within minutes, her nursing bag secured in the passenger seat like a trusted companion. The familiar weight of professional responsibility settled over her, pushing away the lingering warmth from the previous evening's conversation with Eli. Right now, she wasn't a woman tentatively exploring new possibilities. She was a nurse, and someone needed her help. The Hochstetler farm was ablaze with lantern light when she arrived. The family gathered in the front yard with the controlled urgency that came from people accustomed to handling crises with quiet efficiency. Young Samuel Hochstetler, barely 14, lay still on a makeshift stretcher, his face pale in the flickering light. "What happened?" Claire asked, dropping to her knees beside the boy as her trained eyes began their assessment. "He was checking on the new calf," Samuel's father explained. "The ladder gave way, and he fell backward onto the barn floor." Claire's hands moved with practiced precision, checking pulse and breathing, testing for spinal injuries with the careful thoroughness that had made her reputation in Atlanta's trauma unit. Samuel was conscious, but clearly in pain, his left arm bent at an unnatural angle. "Samuel, can you tell me your name?" she asked gently. "Samuel Hochstetler," he replied through gritted teeth. "Did I break something?" "Your arm, certainly, possibly your collarbone as well, but the good news is you're talking clearly and your spine seems intact." Claire looked up at his parents. "He needs to get to the hospital for x-rays and proper setting of the fracture." "We don't," Mrs. Hochstetler began, the familiar hesitation that Claire had learned to recognize. The Amish relationship with modern medicine was complicated, rooted in both practical concerns about cost and philosophical questions about God's will. "I know," Claire said gently, "but this isn't something that can be treated with traditional remedies. Without proper setting, his arm might never heal correctly." As she prepared a sling to stabilize Samuel's arm for transport, Claire became aware of approaching hoofbeats. A moment later, Eli's buggy materialized from the darkness, followed closely by Bishop Miller's. "We heard about the accident," Eli said, climbing down from his buggy with an urgency she'd never seen from him. "How bad is it?" "Broken arm, possibly broken collarbone. He needs hospital care." Claire finished securing the sling, noting how Samuel's color was improving now that the arm was properly supported. "The boy's strong," Bishop Miller observed, his weathered hands gentle as he touched Samuel's forehead in blessing. "But sometimes strength means accepting help when it's offered." Claire understood the subtle message in the bishop's words, permission for the family to seek outside medical care without feeling they were abandoning their faith. "I can drive them," she offered. "My car will be more comfortable than calling an ambulance." "I'll come too," Eli said quietly, "to help with Samuel and to speak with the hospital staff if needed." As they carefully transferred Samuel to Claire's car, she caught Eli's eye over the boy's stretcher. Something passed between them, a recognition of shared purpose, of two people united in caring for someone who needed them. The drive to the regional hospital was quiet, except for Claire's gentle conversation with Samuel, keeping him alert and distracted from his pain. Eli sat beside her in the front seat, his presence both surprising and comforting. She hadn't expected him to volunteer for this midnight journey into the English world. At the hospital, Claire watched Eli navigate the unfamiliar environment with the same quiet competence he brought to his blacksmithing. He spoke with admitting staff, translated medical terms for Samuel's worried parents, and somehow managed to project an authority that had the emergency room treating their young Amish patient with extra consideration. "You're good at this," Claire observed during a quiet moment in the waiting room. "At what?" "Being a bridge between worlds. Your people trust you, but you're not afraid of ours." Eli was quiet for a moment, watching Samuel's parents speak in hushed Pennsylvania Dutch with Bishop. "Miller, fear rarely solves problems," he said finally. "And sometimes the things we're afraid of are the very things we need most." Claire studied his profile in the harsh hospital lighting. "Are we still talking about hospitals?" Their eyes met, and Eli's slight smile told her they understood each other perfectly. By dawn, Samuel was resting comfortably, with his arm properly set and casted. The doctor, impressed by Claire's initial assessment and treatment, had commented on her skill. "You probably saved this boy from permanent damage," he'd said. "That was textbook field treatment." On the drive home, as the sun painted the Pennsylvania countryside in shades of gold and green, Claire felt the exhaustion of the night catching up with her. But underneath the tiredness was something else, a sense of rightness about the night's events, about working alongside Eli to help someone they both cared about. "Thank you," she said as they turned onto the road leading back to the Amish community, "for coming with us, for helping." "Thank you for being there when Samuel needed you," Eli replied. "Not everyone would have answered that call so quickly." "It's what I do. It's who you are," he corrected gently. "There's a difference." They drove in comfortable silence until they reached Claire's small rented house at the edge of town. Maisie would be waking soon, full of questions about where her mother had gone in the middle of the night. "Eli," Claire said, as he prepared to climb into his buggy for the ride home. "Yes, last night, when you came to help. You didn't have to do that. It wasn't your emergency. Samuel is part of my community. You were helping him, which makes it my concern, too." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "Besides, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about being scared. And I'm learning that being scared and being brave aren't opposites. Sometimes they're the same thing." Claire felt her heart skip in the way it had when she was much younger, when the world still felt full of endless possibilities. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that whatever this is between us, friendship, partnership, something more, I'd like to find out. If you're willing to be brave too." Looking at him in the morning light, his honest face marked by a night of caring for others, Claire made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. "I'm willing," she said simply. Later, as Claire tucked an exhausted Maisie back into bed after explaining about Samuel's accident, her daughter's sleepy voice stopped her at the door. "Mom, you smell like the hospital, but you look happy." "Do? Uh-huh. Different happy than usual. Like when you used to sing in the car before Daddy got mad about it." Claire's throat tightened. She'd forgotten she used to sing, forgotten the joy she'd once found in simple moments of contentment. "Get some sleep, baby. We'll talk more later." But as she stood in her kitchen, still wearing her nursing badge from the night's emergency, Claire realized her daughter was right. She did feel different, not just happy, but hopeful in a way she'd almost forgotten was possible. Outside her window, she could see Eli's farm in the distance, smoke rising from his morning fire. For the first time since leaving Atlanta, she allowed herself to imagine a future that was about more than just survival, more than just getting through each day. She was learning to hope again, and that perhaps was the most dangerous thing of all. The handwritten cookbook felt fragile in Eli's weathered hands as he stood at Claire's front door, second-guessing his decision for the third time in as many minutes. Sarah had compiled these recipes over 3 decades of marriage. Her careful script documenting everything from holiday meals to remedies for common ailments. It was more than a cookbook. It was a piece of his wife's heart, preserved on yellowed pages that still carried the faint scent of her kitchen. Claire answered, his knock with Maisie balanced on her hip, the child's blonde curls still tousled from an afternoon nap. The domestic scene struck him with unexpected force. The easy intimacy between mother and daughter, the way Claire's face lit up when she saw him at her door. Eli, she said with genuine pleasure, this is a nice surprise. We were just discussing dinner plans, weren't we, Maisie? Mom was going to make grilled cheese again, Maisie announced with the dramatic resignation of someone facing culinary monotony. She says she's still learning to cook for just 2 people. I see. Eli held out the cookbook, his heart beating faster than seemed reasonable for such a simple gesture. I thought you might find this useful. It was Sarah's. Claire's. Expression grew soft as she recognized the significance of what he was offering. She shifted Maisie to her other hip and accepted the book with careful reverence. Eli, I can't take this. It's too precious. Which is exactly why I want you to have it. He cleared his throat, the words coming with difficulty. Sarah always said that recipes were meant to be shared, not hoarded. She would have liked the idea of her cooking bringing comfort to someone who needed it. Claire opened the book carefully, her eyes scanning the faded handwriting. Look at this, Maisie. Real Pennsylvania Dutch recipes, shoofly pie, chicken and dumplings, schnitz und knepp. What's schnitz und knepp? Maisie asked, leaning in to study the page. Ham with dried apples and dumplings, Eli explained. Sarah made the best in 3 counties. The recipe is right there, but she never wrote down the most important part, which was the stories she told while she cooked. She said food without stories was just fuel, but food with love and laughter fed the soul. Claire looked up at him, her eyes bright with understanding. Would you like to stay for dinner? Maybe you could tell us some of those stories while we try one of these recipes. The invitation hung between them, loaded with possibilities and unspoken promises. Maisie wiggled down from her mother's arms and grabbed Eli's hand with the easy familiarity of a child who'd already claimed him as family. Please stay, she said earnestly. Mom tries really hard, but her cooking tastes like she's still thinking about other things while she does it. Maisie, Claire protested, but her laughter took any sting from the rebuke. It's true, Mom. When you made pancakes last week, you put salt instead of sugar because you were worried about Mrs. Henderson's blood pressure. Eli found himself smiling at the child's brutal honesty. What do you say? We try Sarah's recipe for chicken and dumplings. It's simple enough for beginners, but impressive enough to make you feel like a real cook. You'd really help us. Claire asked. I'd be honored. What followed was one of the most unexpectedly tender evenings of Eli's adult life. Claire's kitchen was modern by Amish standards, electric appliances and conveniences that Sarah had never known. But the fundamental rhythm of preparing a meal together felt achingly familiar. He guided Claire through the recipe with patient instruction, showing her how to roll the dumplings thin enough to cook evenly, how to season the broth with just enough herbs to complement rather than overpower the chicken. Her hands learned quickly, adapting to the unfamiliar techniques with the same focused attention he'd seen her apply to medical procedures. Sarah used to say that cooking was like nursing, he observed, watching Claire taste the broth and adjust the seasoning. You had to pay attention to what was needed, trust your instincts, and remember that you were caring for people you loved. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. She also would have liked you very much. The quiet certainty in his voice made Claire pause, wooden spoon halfway to her mouth. How can you be so sure? Because she always said the measure of a person wasn't what they had, but what they gave. And you've given this community, given Maisie, given me, more than you know. Maisie, who had been quietly coloring at the kitchen table while the adults cooked, looked up from her drawing. Are you going to marry my mom? The direct question landed like a stone thrown into still water, creating ripples of surprise and embarrassment. Claire nearly dropped the spoon she was holding, while Eli felt heat rise in his cheeks. Maisie Elizabeth, Claire managed, that's not an appropriate question. Why not? You like each other. You're both lonely. And you look happy when you're Cooking together like you fit, out of the mouths of babes, Eli thought, remembering Bishop Miller's words from weeks earlier. The child's observation was uncomfortably accurate. They did fit together in this domestic moment, moving around each other in the kitchen with an ease that seemed to have developed naturally. Marriage is complicated, Claire explained gently. There are many things adults have to consider. Like what? Like different ways of life, different beliefs, But those are just details, Maisie interrupted with the supreme confidence of 7-year-old logic. The important part is that you make each other smile more than you used to. Eli caught Claire's eye across the kitchen, seeing his own mixture of amazement and affection reflected there. This child, with her innocent wisdom and fearless honesty, had once again cut through adult complexities to expose simple truths. "She's not wrong," he said quietly. "No," Claire agreed, her voice soft with wonder. "She's not." They finished cooking in comfortable silence, the kitchen filled with the rich aroma of chicken and herbs and the intangible warmth that came from shared purpose. When they finally sat down to eat, Maisie pronounced the meal better than anything Mom ever made before, which earned her a playful scolding and Eli a look of grateful appreciation. As the evening wound down and Eli prepared to leave, Claire walked him to the door while Maisie cleared the table with unusual diligence. "Thank you," she said softly, "for the cookbook, for the cooking lesson, for everything. Thank you for letting me share Sarah's recipes with you, for giving them new life." They stood close enough that Eli could smell the faint scent of her shampoo, could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. The moment felt suspended, full of possibilities neither quite dared to name. "Eli?" Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. "When Maisie asked about marriage, you didn't seem shocked. Should I have been? I don't know. I need to understand what this is becoming between us." Eli considered his words carefully, aware that his next statement would shape whatever came after. "I think it's becoming something neither of us expected but both of us need. Something worth exploring, even if we don't know where it leads." Claire's smile was soft and uncertain and brave all at once. "That's what I hoped you'd say." As Eli drove home through the gathering darkness, Sarah's cookbook secure in Claire's kitchen and the taste of shared laughter still warm in his memory, he realized that hope had crept into his life so gradually he'd almost missed its arrival. For 11 years, he'd believed his story was finished. Now at 62, he was discovering that some stories had more chapters than their authors ever imagined. The packet of garden seeds felt surprisingly heavy in Claire's palm as she knelt beside Eli in the rich Pennsylvania soil. Spring had arrived, with unusual warmth, and the morning sun painted everything in shades of gold and green. Eli had suggested they plant a small kitchen garden behind her rented house. "Nothing fancy," he'd said, "just some herbs and vegetables to give you a taste of growing your own food. The soil needs to be loose enough for the roots to spread, but firm enough to support the plant," Eli explained, his hands working the dark earth with practiced ease. "Like most good things in life, it requires the right balance." Claire smiled at his gentle philosophy, watching how his weathered fingers coaxed life from the ground with the same patient skill she'd seen him apply to his blacksmithing. Everything Eli did carried this quality of unhurried competence, as if he understood that the best results came to those willing to work with nature's timing rather than against it. "Maisie's going to love this," she said, sprinkling basil seeds in the prepared row. "She's been asking if we can stay here permanently, if this can really be home. What do you tell her?" Claire paused, a handful of seeds suspended between palm and earth. The question carried more weight than its simple words suggested. "I tell her that home isn't a place. It's where people love you for who you are." "And do you feel loved here for who you are?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. She looked up to find him watching her with an expression that was both patient and intent, as if her answer mattered more than he wanted to admit. "More than I expected to," she said honestly. "More than I thought I deserved." "Claire," his voice carried a gentle reproach. "You deserve all the love this world has to offer." Before she could respond, the sound of car tires on gravel announced an unexpected arrival. Claire turned toward the driveway, her contentment instantly replaced by familiar tension. A sleek silver sedan was pulling up to her house. Expensive, out of place in this community of modest homes and practical vehicles. "Who's that?" Eli asked, noting her sudden change in demeanor. Claire's heart sank as the car door opened and a tall, well-dressed man stepped out. Even from a distance, David Patterson commanded attention. Expensive suit, perfect posture, the kind of confidence that came from never being denied anything he truly wanted. "That's my ex-husband," she said quietly, her voice tight with old. "The fears." Eli immediately moved closer, not touching her but positioning himself as a quiet source of support. "Did you know he was coming?" "No." Claire struggled to her feet, brushing soil from her hands with movements that betrayed her agitation. "He shouldn't be here. The divorce papers were clear about—" "Claire." David's voice carried across the yard, smooth and commanding. "We need to talk." Maisie emerged from the house where she had been playing, stopping short when she saw her father. Her small face went carefully blank in a way that broke Claire's heart. The expression of a child who'd learned to hide her emotions for self-protection. "Hello, Daddy," she said politely, but made no move to approach him. "Hello, sweetheart." David's smile was practiced, the kind he used with hospital administrators and difficult patients. "You look well. Country life agrees with you." His tone suggested that country life was a temporary adventure rather than a permanent choice, and Claire felt her protective instincts sharpen. "What are you doing here, David?" she asked, walking toward the house with Eli following at a respectful distance. "I came to talk sense into you. This fantasy you're living—" He gestured dismissively at the garden, the modest house, the simple life she'd built. "It's not sustainable. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years." David's attention shifted to Eli, taking in his plain clothes and work-worn hands with the kind of assessment that reduced people to their utility. "And who might you be?" "Eli Zook," came the quiet reply. There was no defensiveness in his tone, but something solid and immovable that suggested he wouldn't be easily dismissed. "Ah, the local handyman." David's smile didn't reach his eyes. How quaint! Claire felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Eli is a master craftsman and a valued member of this community. He's also my friend." "Friend." David repeated the word as if it tasted unpleasant. "Claire, you're a skilled professional. You have a medical degree from Emory, training from some of the best hospitals in the country. What are you doing playing pioneer in the middle of nowhere? I'm raising our daughter in a place where she can grow up feeling safe and valued. She could have that in Atlanta, in our home, with her father." The possessive pronoun wasn't lost on anyone present. Claire saw Maisie move closer to the house, instinctively seeking escape routes. "This is her home now," Claire said firmly. "And it's my home." "Come on, Claire, be reasonable. You can't seriously plan to spend the rest of your life in this—" He paused, searching for a word that would convey his disdain without being overtly insulting. "This pastoral isolation." "Why not?" The question came from Eli, asked with genuine curiosity rather than confrontation. "What's wrong with a life lived simply, surrounded by people who care about each other?" David turned his full attention to Eli for the first time, and Claire recognized the look, the same expression he'd worn when dismissing nurses' opinions or questioning her household decisions. "Nothing wrong with it for some people," David said, smoothly, "but Claire is capable of so much more. She's wasting her talents in this backwater." "She's saving lives," Eli replied calmly. "She's raising a beautiful daughter. She's contributing to a community that values her skills." "That doesn't sound like waste to me. And what would you know about David?" Claire's voice cut through his building condescension like a blade. "That's enough." The authority in her tone seemed to surprise him. This wasn't the Claire he remembered, the woman who used to apologize for having opinions, who second-guessed herself into silence. "I want you to leave," she continued. Now, I'm not leaving without my daughter. The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of tension that reached every corner of the yard. Maisie made a small sound of distress, and Eli stepped closer to Claire's side. Maisie isn't property to be collected, Claire said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. She's a child who deserves to feel secure. You're showing up here unannounced, making demands. This isn't about her well-being, it's about your ego. My ego. David's composure cracked slightly. I'm trying to save my family from this ridiculous mistake you're making. Look around, Claire, really look. This isn't the life you were meant for. You're wrong. The words came from Maisie, spoken with quiet courage that made every adult turn toward her. Mom is different here. She smiles more. She sings again, and people are nice to her instead of making her feel stupid. The innocent observation struck David like a physical blow, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Maisie, that's not... It's true, the child continued, moving to stand beside her mother. And Eli teaches me things and doesn't get mad when I ask questions. He makes Mom laugh, and she's not scared anymore. In the silence that followed, Claire felt something shift inside her, the last vestiges of doubt and fear crystallizing into certainty. This was her life now, her choice, her family. Not the traditional family she'd once imagined, but something better, something built on respect and kindness rather than obligation and control. You need to go, David, she said quietly. If you want to be part of Maisie's life, we can discuss. Supervise visitation through our lawyers. But this, showing up here trying to intimidate us back into submission, this ends today. David looked between Claire and Eli, his expression cycling through anger, disbelief, and finally a grudging recognition that the woman he'd once controlled was truly beyond his reach. This isn't over, Claire. Yes, she said firmly. It is, after. His car disappeared down the road. Claire sank onto her front steps, the adrenaline leaving her shaky and exhausted. Eli sat beside her, close enough to offer comfort without presuming to take liberties. Are you all right? He asked gently. Better than all right, she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. For the first time in years, I stood up to him without apologizing for who I am. You were magnificent, Maisie announced, climbing into her mother's lap with the boneless grace of childhood. Like a mama bear protecting her cub, Claire laughed, the sound bright with relief and newfound strength. I suppose I was. As evening approached and they finished planting the garden by lamplight, Claire realized that David's unexpected visit had accomplished something he'd never intended. It had shown her exactly how much her life had changed, how strong she'd become, and how deep her roots in this new soil had already grown. The seeds they'd planted today would take weeks to germinate, months to mature, but the seeds of her new life, planted the day a 7-year-old girl decided two lonely people needed each other, were already blooming into something beautiful. The medical emergency kit had never felt heavier in Claire's hands as she hurried across the Yoder farmyard, her heart racing with the urgency of the call that had come just after sunrise. Elder Abraham Yoder, Eli's former father-in-law and one of the most respected men in the Amish community, had collapsed while doing morning chores. His wife Ruth's voice on the phone had been steady, but Claire could hear the fear underneath. Her calm words, "He's breathing, but his color isn't right," Ruth had explained. "His chest hurts, and his left arm is numb." Classic heart attack symptoms Claire had recognized immediately. She'd grabbed her emergency supplies and driven faster than she'd ever dared on these country roads, praying she wouldn't arrive too late. The Yoder farmhouse was filled with quiet activity when she arrived, family members speaking in hushed Pennsylvania Dutch, children shepherded to the kitchen while the adults gathered in the front room, where Abraham lay on a simple wooden couch, his weathered face gray with pain. Claire dropped to her knees beside him, her medical training taking over completely. "Abraham, can you hear me?" His eyes focused on her face with effort. "The English nurse," he whispered, attempting a smile. "I suppose this means it's serious." It means you're smart enough to let people help you when you need it, Claire replied, already checking his pulse while reaching for her stethoscope. His heartbeat was irregular, too fast, and his skin was clammy with cold sweat. "Ruth," she called to his wife, who hovered nearby with the controlled anxiety of someone trying to stay calm for her family's sake. "I need you to call for an ambulance. Tell them we have a probable heart attack, male, age 76, conscious but in distress." "No hospitals," Abraham managed to say. "I want to die at home." "You're not going to die," Claire said firmly, continuing her examination. "But you are having a heart attack, and that means we need to get you to people with the equipment to help. Your heart heal." She'd learned in her months with the Amish community that medical decisions were often complicated by religious beliefs and cultural preferences. But she'd also learned that respect and honest communication could bridge almost any gap. "Abraham," she said, making sure he was looking directly at her, "I know you trust God with your life, so do I. But God gave us minds to create medicines and technology that can help heal the bodies he gave us. Let us help you." Before Abraham could respond, the sound of rapid hoofbeats announced another arrival. Through the window, Claire could see Eli's buggy approaching at a speed that would have been dangerous on any road less familiar to him. He burst through the front door, with Bishop Miller close behind, both men taking in the scene with the quick assessment of people accustomed to medical emergencies in a community that often relied on itself. "How bad?" Eli asked quietly, moving to kneel beside Claire. "Bad enough that he needs a hospital," she replied, not looking up from her patient. "His heart rhythm is unstable, and he's showing signs of significant damage." She watched Eli's face tighten with worry. Abraham wasn't just his former father-in-law. He was the man who'd helped raise Sarah, who'd walked her down the aisle at their wedding, who'd been like a second father to Eli throughout their marriage. "Abraham," Bishop Miller said gently, "what does your heart tell you to do?" It was a question that encompassed far more than medical decisions. In Amish culture, the heart was the seat of spiritual wisdom as much as physical life. Abraham's eyes moved between Claire and Eli, then settled on his wife's worried face. "My heart tells me I'm not ready to leave Ruth yet. If there's healing to be found, I should seek it." The ambulance arrived within minutes, but it was clear that every second mattered. As the EMTs prepared Abraham for transport, Claire found herself automatically taking charge of the medical coordination, explaining his symptoms, providing vital signs, ensuring continuity of care. "I'll ride with him," she told Ruth. "You can follow with Bishop Miller." "I'm coming too," Eli said quietly. Claire looked at him in surprise. "You don't have to." "He's family," Eli replied simply. "And so are you." The words hit Claire with unexpected force. In the midst of medical crisis, Eli had just made a declaration that redefined their relationship in ways neither of them had quite acknowledged before. The ride to the hospital was tense, with Claire monitoring Abraham's condition while the EMTs worked to stabilize his heart rhythm. She found herself praying, something she'd done less frequently since leaving Atlanta, but which came naturally now in this moment of crisis. At the hospital, Claire's medical background proved invaluable. She translated between the Amish family's concerns and the cardiologist's technical explanations, helping everyone understand the treatment options and likely outcomes. "He's stable," Dr. Martinez explained after several hours of tests and procedures. "We've opened the blocked artery and restored blood flow to his heart. He'll need to stay for observation, but the prognosis is very good." Relief flooded through the waiting room like a wave. Ruth began crying quietly, the first emotion she'd allowed herself to show since the crisis began. Eli's hand found Claire's shoulder, squeezing gently in gratitude and something deeper. "Thank you," he said quietly. "If you hadn't been there." "But I was there," Claire interrupted. "That's what matters." As the family settled in for the long wait that hospital vigils require, Claire became aware of something unexpected. Other Amish families in the waiting room, people she'd treated over the past months, were approaching her with quiet thanks and requests for advice about their own relatives' conditions. "Mrs. Patterson helped my grandson when he broke his arm," she heard one woman telling another. "She knew exactly what to do. She delivered my neighbor's baby when there wasn't time to get to the hospital," another added. "Gentle hands, that one. Understands our ways." Claire realized that word of her medical skills and cultural sensitivity had spread through the Amish community more widely than she'd known. She wasn't just the English nurse anymore. She was their nurse, someone they trusted with their most precious concerns. Later that evening, as Abraham rested comfortably and the immediate crisis had passed, Bishop Miller approached Claire in the hospital corridor. "Walk with me," he said gently. They strolled toward the hospital's chapel, a simple interfaith space that felt oddly similar to the plain meeting houses where the Amish gathered for worship. "You saved his life today," Miller said without preamble. "Doctors saved his life. You recognized what was happening and acted quickly. You bridged the gap between our world and theirs. You helped Abraham make a decision that honored both his faith and his family's needs." Miller paused, studying her face with the penetrating gaze that made him such an effective spiritual leader. "That's a rare gift, Claire. I just did what any nurse would do." "No," Miller said firmly. "Any nurse would have provided medical care. You provided healing for Abraham's body and for our community's fears about accepting help from outside our traditions." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the day's events. "There's something I need to tell you," Miller continued. "Something that might change how you see your place here." Claire waited, sensing the importance of whatever he was about to say. "The community has been discussing your situation, your relationship with Eli, your daughter's happiness here, your service to our people." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We've decided to offer you something that's very rarely extended to outsiders." "What do you mean?" "Formal membership in our community. The opportunity to convert, to become truly Amish, if that's something you desire." Claire felt her breath catch. I don't know what to say." "It wouldn't be a decision to make lightly," Miller warned. "It would mean accepting our faith, our way of life, our customs. It would mean raising Maisie within our traditions. And it would mean," he glanced toward where Eli sat with Abraham's family, "that certain relationships that might otherwise be complicated would become possible." The implications hit Claire like a wave. This wasn't just an invitation to join a community. It was a path toward a future with Eli that she'd been afraid to even imagine. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why would you offer this to me?" "Because today you showed us something important. When crisis came, you didn't see English or Amish patients. You saw people who needed help. You honored our values while using your gifts to serve our community. That's what we look for in someone who truly belongs with us." Miller stood, preparing to return to Abraham's bedside. "Think about it, Claire. Pray about it. But know that whatever you decide, you have a place here. You've earned that right through service and love." As Claire sat alone in the chapel, her mind racing with possibilities she'd never dared consider, she realized that everything had changed in the span of a single day. She'd arrived in Pennsylvania months ago simply seeking safety and a fresh start. Now she was being offered something she'd never expected, not just a new life, but a new identity, a new faith, a new future. The question was whether she had the courage to accept it. Outside the chapel windows, the Pennsylvania countryside stretched beneath a canopy of stars. Somewhere in that peaceful landscape was the small house where Maisie slept, the garden they'd planted together, the forge where Eli worked with patient skill. It was a life of simplicity and purpose, surrounded by people who valued kindness over ambition, community over individual success. For the first time since leaving Atlanta, Claire allowed herself to imagine not just staying in this place, but truly belonging to it. The thought both thrilled and terrified her in equal measure. At 62 and 43 respectively, she and Eli had thought their stories were largely written. Now they were discovering that sometimes the most important chapters came later than anyone expected, written by hands wise enough to know the value of second chances. The wedding quilt pattern lay spread across the kitchen table like a map of possibilities, its intricate design of interlocking rings and blooming flowers catching the morning light that streamed through Claire's windows. Rebecca Stoltzfus and 3 other Amish women had arrived just after breakfast, their arms laden with fabric samples and gentle smiles that spoke of acceptance earned through months of quiet observation. The double wedding ring pattern, Rebecca explained, tracing the circular motifs with a weathered finger. It's traditional for couples who've found their way back to love after loss. Claire's breath caught at the implication. She looked around the circle of women, mothers and grandmothers who'd watched her integrate into their community, who'd trusted her with their children's health, who were now speaking of marriage as if it were not just possible, but inevitable. That is, Eli and I haven't discussed, she began, but Martha Yoder, Abraham's daughter-in-law, gently interrupted. Some things don't need discussing, she said with the wisdom of someone who'd been married for 35 years. They just need accepting. But the conversion process, Claire said quietly. Bishop Miller mentioned it, but I don't know if I'm ready to make such a commitment. It's not just about me. It's about Maisie's future, her education, her choices, children. Adapt, Rebecca assured her, and Maisie seems to have adapted already. She knows our customs, speaks a little Pennsylvania Dutch, helps with the younger children after church. She's found her place here just as you have. Through the window, Claire could see Maisie playing with the Hochstetler children in the yard, her laughter mixing with theirs in the universal language of childhood joy. Since David's visit 3 weeks ago, her daughter had seemed more settled, more confident in calling this place home. The harvest celebration is in 2 weeks, Martha continued. It's when our community comes together to celebrate the abundance God has provided. It would be a fitting time for certain announcements to be made. The suggestion hung in the air with gentle insistence. Claire understood what they were really asking, whether she was ready to commit not just to Eli, but to the entire way of life that would make their union possible. I need to speak with Eli, she said finally. We need to make sure we're both ready for what this would mean. Of course, Rebecca agreed. But Claire, don't let fear of change keep you from embracing what your heart already knows to be true. After the women left, Claire sat alone with the quilt pattern, her thoughts as complex as the interwoven design before her. Every ring in the pattern connected to others, creating a web of relationships that was beautiful precisely because of its interconnectedness. It was a perfect metaphor for what she was being offered. Not just marriage to Eli, but membership. In a community that valued interdependence over independence, the sound of a buggy approaching drew her to the window. Eli was climbing down from the driver's seat with the careful movements of someone carrying something precious. In his hands was a small wooden box, simply crafted but polished to a soft sheen. I brought you something, he said when she opened the door, his expression unusually nervous. May I come in? Claire led him to the kitchen, noting how his eyes lingered on the quilt pattern still spread across the table. The ladies have been busy, he observed. They seem to think they know something we don't, Claire replied carefully. Eli set the wooden box on the table beside the fabric samples. Maybe they do, or maybe they just see what we've been too careful to say out loud. He opened the box, revealing a small river stone, smooth and grey, worn by countless years of water and weather. Claire looked at him questioningly. This was Sarah's, he explained quietly. She found it by the creek that ran through her father's property the day I first told her I loved her. She kept it all our married life, said it reminded her that the most beautiful things were shaped by time and patience, not force. Claire lifted the stone, feeling its surprising weight and warmth. It's lovely, but why are you showing it to me? Because yesterday when I was working in my shop, I found myself thinking about what she would say if she could see us now, if she would approve of what's growing between us. Eli's voice was steady, but Claire could see the emotional cost of these words. So, I went to her grave and sat there for a long time, just thinking and praying, and when I was ready to leave, this stone was sitting right on top of her headstone. Not beside it, not near it, right on top, as if someone had placed it there deliberately. Eli met her eyes directly. There hadn't been a stone there when I arrived. Claire felt a shiver that had nothing to do with temperature. What do you think it means? I think it means Sarah is at peace with us moving forward. I think she's giving us her blessing. Eli reached across the table and covered Claire's hand with his own. I think it's time to stop being afraid of happiness. The simple statement hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Claire looked down at their joined hands, his, weathered and scarred from decades of honest work, hers softer, but marked with the small cuts and calluses that came from months of gardening and learning to live more simply. Eli, she said quietly, the bishop offered me the chance to convert, to become Amish officially. If he was surprised by this news, he didn't show it. And how do you feel about that? Terrified, hopeful, uncertain about what it would mean for Maisie. She paused, gathering courage, but also more certain than I've been about anything in years that this is where I belong. And if you convert, if you become one of us officially, then nothing would stand in the way of us being together. Really together. The words came out in a rush, as if saying them quickly would make them less frightening. Eli was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of careful consideration. Claire, I need you to know something. I've lived 62 years, been married for 31 of them, buried the woman I thought was the only love of my life. I know what it means to make promises, to build a life with someone, to love so deeply that losing them feels like losing part of yourself. Claire's heart began to race, uncertain where this was leading. I also know that love isn't a finite resource. It doesn't diminish when it's shared, it grows. What I feel for you doesn't diminish what I felt for Sarah. It's different, shaped by who we both are now, by the wisdom that comes from understanding how precious and fragile happiness can be. He lifted their joined hands and kissed her knuckles. Gently, if you're willing to take the risk, if you're willing to join our community and build a life with me, I promise you this. I will love you with everything I have, for whatever time we're given. I will be a father to Maisie in every way that matters, and I will never ever take for granted the gift of this second chance we've been offered. Tears Claire hadn't realized were gathering spilled over onto her cheeks. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it, to the conversion, to the community, to you. The kiss that followed was gentle and certain, tasting of hope and promise and the sweet relief of finally stopping the careful dance they'd been performing for months. When they broke apart, both were smiling through tears. So, we're really doing this? Claire asked, laughter bubbling up through her emotions. We're really doing this, Eli confirmed. At the harvest celebration, if you're ready, in front of the whole community. What will I wear? What will I say? I don't know the customs. For Amish engagements, Claire. Eli's voice was gentle but firm. Breathe. The customs matter less than the commitment. The community cares more about the sincerity of our intentions than the perfection of our execution. A crash from outside interrupted their moment, followed by Maisie's voice calling, I'm okay! Nobody panic! They looked at each other and burst into laughter, the kind of shared amusement that spoke of family life, of futures filled with small crises and everyday joys. I should check on her, Claire said, but made no immediate move to leave Eli's side. In a minute, he agreed, but didn't release her hand. They sat in comfortable silence, the magnitude of their decision settling around them like a warm blanket. The quilt pattern on the table seemed less daunting now, more like a promise than a challenge. Each ring would represent not just their union, but their integration into a community that had watched them find each other, and offered them the gift of belonging. "Eli," Claire said softly, "yes, thank you for being patient with me, for not pushing, for letting me find my own way to this decision. Thank you for being brave enough to make it, for choosing love over fear." Through the window, they could see Maisie helping the younger children repair whatever had broken in their play, her natural leadership skills already marking her as someone who would thrive in a community that valued cooperation and mutual support. "She's going to love having a father again," Claire observed. "And I'm going to love having a daughter," Eli replied. "Both of you are going to transform my life in ways I'm only beginning to understand." As afternoon sunlight slanted through the kitchen windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, Claire marveled at how completely her life had changed in less than a year. She'd arrived in Pennsylvania seeking only safety and a fresh start. Instead, she'd found love, community, purpose, and a future she'd never dared to imagine. The harvest celebration was 2 weeks away. 2 weeks to prepare for the most important announcement of her adult life, to ready herself for the questions and scrutiny that would come with such a public declaration, to finalize her decision about conversion and all it would entail. But sitting here with Eli's hand warm in hers and Sarah's blessing stone smooth beneath her palm, Claire felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. She had found her home, her heart, her future. The rest was just details. The harvest celebration buzzed with the gentle energy of a community coming together to celebrate abundance. Long tables groaned under the weight of fresh bread, preserves, roasted vegetables, and desserts that represented generations of carefully guarded recipes. Children darted between the adults like bright birds, their laughter mixing with the deeper voices of their parents and grandparents. The October air carried the scent of wood smoke and apple cider, creating an atmosphere that felt both festive and sacred. Claire stood at the edge of the gathering, smoothing the simple blue dress she'd chosen for this momentous day. It wasn't quite Amish in its styling, that transformation would come gradually if her conversion proceeded, but it was modest and respectful, a bridge between her old life and the new one she was claiming. Maisie appeared at her side, practically vibrating with excitement. "Mom, everyone's asking when you and Eli are going to make your announcement. Rebecca Stoltzfus says she's never seen such a poorly kept secret in her life." Claire smiled despite her nerves. The past 2 weeks had been filled with quiet conversations, gentle questions, and the kind of community scrutiny that came with love rather than judgment. Everyone seemed to know what was coming, yet the formal declaration still mattered. It was the difference between assumption and commitment, between hope and promise. "Where is Eli?" Claire asked, scanning the crowd for his familiar figure. "Over by the men's tables, looking about as nervous as you do," Maisie observed with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Are you scared, Mom?" "A little," Claire admitted. "Big changes are always scary, even when they're good changes. But you're happy too, right?" Claire looked down at her daughter, this brave, perceptive child who'd orchestrated this entire romance with the innocent wisdom that only 7-year-olds possessed. "Yes, baby, I'm very happy." Bishop Miller's voice carried across the gathering, calling for attention with the gentle authority that came from decades of spiritual leadership. The conversations gradually quieted as people moved closer, forming the kind of informal circle that characterized Amish gatherings. No rigid hierarchies, just a community coming together to share important moments. "Before we give thanks for this year's harvest," Miller began, his weathered hands folded peacefully in front of him, "we have some community business to address, some joyful news to share." Claire felt her heart begin to race. This was it, the moment when private feelings became public commitment, when possibility became reality. "As many of you know," Miller continued, "we've been blessed this past year with new members joining our community. Claire Patterson has served our families, with skill and compassion, earning our trust through her actions rather than her words." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Claire caught sight of Abraham Yoda, recovered now from his heart attack, nodding approvingly. Beside him, his wife Ruth smiled with the warmth of someone who'd been personally touched by Claire's care. "Today," Miller announced, "Claire has asked to formally begin the process of joining our community through conversion. She wishes to embrace our faith, our customs, our way of life." The announcement was met with gentle applause and expressions of welcome that brought tears to Claire's eyes. This wasn't just acceptance, it was celebration, as if the community had been waiting for her to catch up with what they'd already recognized as inevitable. "Furthermore," Miller continued, his eyes twinkling with barely suppressed pleasure, "there's another matter that concerns our community's future." Eli emerged from the crowd, walking toward Claire with the measured pace of someone who'd made peace with a momentous decision. His plain clothes were identical to what he wore every day, but something in his bearing was different, more upright, more purposeful, as if he was finally allowing himself to claim happiness without apology. When he reached Claire's side, he took her hand with a gesture that felt both natural and profound. The simple contact sent a wave of calm through her nervous system, reminding her that this wasn't just about public declaration. It was about two people who'd found their way to each other through loss and loneliness, and the brave decision to risk love again. "Eli Zook," Miller said formally, "do you wish to speak?" Eli nodded, his eyes never leaving Claire's face. "I do." He turned to address the community, but kept Claire's hand firmly in his. 11 years ago, I thought my story was finished. I believed God had given me all the love I was meant to have, and I was grateful for what I'd received." His voice carried across the gathering with quiet strength, reaching every ear while somehow feeling like an intimate conversation. "I was wrong," he continued simply. "God doesn't ration love or limit second chances to those who think they deserve them. He offers grace to those who are brave enough to accept it." Eli paused, gathering courage for what came next. "Claire Patterson, you came into our community as a stranger and became family through your service to our people. You brought healing to our bodies and joy to our hearts. You showed us that kindness has no boundaries, that love can bloom at any age, in any season." The crowd was completely still now, caught in the gravity of this moment. "Today, in front of our community and in God's presence, I want to ask you formally." Eli's voice caught slightly, emotion threatening to overwhelm his careful composure. "Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, Maisie's mother, and a permanent member of our family?" The question hung in the afternoon air like a bell's clear note, beautiful and resonant, and waiting for an answer that would change everything. Claire's answer came not in words, but in tears, the kind that spoke of overwhelming joy rather than sorrow. She nodded first, unable to trust her voice, then found the strength to speak the word that would reshape both their futures. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course, yes." The community erupted in gentle celebration, applause that felt like blessing, laughter that spoke of shared joy, the kind of communal happiness that came from watching two people claim the love they deserved. Children cheered with the uninhibited delight of those who understood that weddings meant cake and celebration, while their parents exchanged knowing smiles that spoke of their own memories of young love and life-changing decisions. Maisie broke from the crowd and launched herself at both adults, wrapping her arms around their legs in a fierce hug that nearly toppled all three of them. "I knew it!" she declared triumphantly. "I knew you were perfect for each other." Eli laughed, a sound rich with relief and happiness, and lifted the child into his arms. "Did you now? And how exactly did you know that?" "Because Mom stopped looking. Sad all the time, and you started humming when you worked." "Happy people hum," Maisie explained with the absolute certainty of someone who'd made an important scientific discovery. Bishop Miller stepped forward, his weathered face creased with satisfaction. "It seems we have much to celebrate today. Not just our harvest, but the planting of new seeds for our community's future." He turned to address the gathered crowd, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd blessed countless unions and understood the sacred nature of commitment. Eli and Claire, your courtship has been witnessed by this entire community. We've watched you grow in understanding of each other, in service to our people, and in faith. Your marriage will not just unite two hearts, it will strengthen the bonds that hold us all together. Ruth Yoder stepped forward, carrying a small wooden box that Claire recognized as similar to the one that had held Sarah's ring for so many years. This was Sarah's, she said gently, offering the box to Eli. She asked me to keep it safe until you found someone worthy of wearing it. Eli's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the box. Inside, nestled in faded silk, lay a simple gold band. The wedding ring Sarah had worn for 31 years, polished smooth by decades of faithful wearing. She knew, Claire asked quietly, emotion thick in her voice. Sarah always said love doesn't end with death, it just changes form, Ruth explained. She made me promise that if you ever found someone who could love you the way you deserved, I would give you this as her blessing on your new marriage. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. This wasn't just Eli moving on from his past. It was Sarah herself, through her final wishes, welcoming Claire into the family and offering her blessing on their union. Eli lifted the ring from its silk bed, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Claire, this ring represents more than just our promise to each other. It represents the continuation of love, the blessing of those who came before us, and the hope of those who will come after. He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that were steady despite the magnitude of the moment. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all these years for her hand. With this ring and before this community, Eli continued, his voice carrying across the gathering, I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you for all the days of our lives. I promise to be a faithful husband to you and a loving father. To Maisie, Claire looked down at the ring, then up at the man who'd just promised her forever. And I promise to love you with all my heart, to be a faithful wife and partner, and to honor the memory of Sarah while building our own life together. The kiss that sealed their engagement was gentle and reverent, witnessed by a community that understood the sacred nature of second chances. When they broke apart, both were smiling through tears that spoke of joy too large to contain. When will the wedding be? Rebecca Stoltzfus called out, already mentally planning the celebration that would follow. Spring, Bishop Miller announced, though Claire suspected this had been decided long before today's proposal. After Claire completes her conversion, and after we've had time to prepare properly, but the engagement, this commitment, begins today. As the formal ceremony dissolved back into celebration, Claire found herself surrounded by women offering congratulations and gentle advice about Amish married life. The men clustered around Eli, their quiet approval evident in backslaps and handshakes that spoke of acceptance earned through years of faithful community membership. Mom, Maisie tugged at Claire's skirt. Does this mean Eli's going to be my real dad now? Claire knelt to her daughter's eye level, her heart full of love for this brave child who'd started it all. If you want him to be, yes. He'll adopt you. Officially, which means you'll be Maisie Zook instead of Maisie Patterson. I like that, Maisie decided. It sounds like I belong here. You do belong here, sweetheart. We both do. As the celebration continued around them and the October sun began its descent toward the horizon, Claire marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she'd been trapped in a loveless marriage, afraid to hope for anything better. Now she stood in the midst of a community that had chosen to embrace her, wearing the ring of a woman who'd blessed her love, engaged to a man who understood that the heart's capacity for love only grew with sharing. The handcrafted wedding bands Eli would forge for their spring ceremony were still months away. But the commitment they'd made today, witnessed by their community and blessed by those who loved them, felt as solid and enduring as anything his skilled hands had ever created. 1 year later, the simple wooden frame caught the morning light, streaming through the kitchen window of what was now undeniably home. Inside the frame, protected behind glass that Eli had carefully cut and fitted, was Maisie's drawing. 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a sun that wore a distinctly cheerful expression. The crayon figures had been updated over the months, with additions that reflected their growing family. A small dog that had wandered onto the property and been immediately adopted by Maisie, chickens that provided fresh eggs each morning, and a garden that now flourished under Claire's increasingly confident care. Claire paused in her morning routine to study the drawing, as she did most days. The child who'd created it was now 8 years old, fluent in Pennsylvania Dutch, and entirely comfortable moving between the modern world of her medical appointments and the timeless rhythm of Amish life. Eli Zook, for the adoption, had been finalized 6 months ago, had grown taller, more confident, and somehow wiser in the way that children did when they felt truly secure in their place in the world. "Good morning, Mrs. Zook," Eli's voice carried from the doorway, warm with the affection that still surprised Claire with its constancy. Even after 6 months of marriage, he sometimes seemed amazed by his own happiness, as if he were still getting used to the idea that joy could be a permanent resident rather than an occasional visitor. "Good morning, Mr. Zook," she replied, turning into his embrace with the easy intimacy of people who'd found their perfect fit. "Sleep well? Better than I have any right to, considering how good my life has turned out," he said, kissing the top of her head, where her hair was still mussed from sleep. Their wedding had taken place on a warm May morning, surrounded by the entire community and blessed with the kind of perfect weather that felt like divine approval. Claire had worn a simple blue dress in the Amish style, her hair covered with a white prayer cap that marked her as a married woman in the faith she'd formally embraced 3 months earlier. The ceremony had been conducted in Pennsylvania Dutch and English, honoring both her new culture and her journey to it. Bishop Miller had spoken about second chances and the wisdom that came with maturity, about how love later in life carried a sweetness that young hearts couldn't yet understand. "These 2 souls have been tested by loss and refined by experience," he'd said. "They come to marriage not as children seeking completion, but as adults offering wholeness." Now, as autumn painted the Pennsylvania countryside in shades of gold and crimson, Claire marveled at how completely her life had transformed. The small house she'd rented had been sold, and she'd moved into Eli's farmhouse, though it was no longer his alone. Her nursing skills had been put to use in ways she'd never imagined, serving a community that trusted her completely. She delivered babies in farmhouse bedrooms, treated injuries with a combination of modern medical knowledge and traditional remedies, and become the bridge between her adopted people and the outside medical world they sometimes needed. "Where's our daughter this morning?" Eli asked, noting Maisie's absence from her usual place at the breakfast table. "Helping Rebecca with the new baby," Claire replied, pouring coffee into 2 heavy mugs. "She's becoming quite the little mother's helper." "She's becoming quite a lot of things," Eli observed with pride. "Smart as a whip, kind as her mother, and stubborn as a mule when she sets her mind to something." "I wonder where she gets that from," Claire teased, remembering the quiet determination with which Eli had courted her, never pushing, but never giving up either. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence, the kind that spoke of people who no longer needed to fill every moment with words. Outside the window, the maple trees that lined their drive were dropping leaves in lazy spirals, creating a carpet of gold that would soon need raking, a task that Maisie had claimed as her own responsibility. "Claire," Eli said suddenly, setting down his coffee cup with the air of someone who'd been thinking about something important. "Yes? Are you happy? Really, truly happy?" The question surprised her. In the 18 months since they'd met, Eli had never been one for unnecessary reassurances or dramatic declarations. But looking at his face, She saw not insecurity, but wonder, the expression of someone still amazed by the gift he'd been given. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she said honestly. "I didn't know life could feel so settled and exciting at the same time." "I was thinking the same thing this morning," Eli admitted. "At our age, I thought all the surprises were behind us. But every day with you and Maisie feels like a new discovery." The sound of rapid footsteps on the front porch announced Maisie's return, and she burst through the door with the energy of someone bearing important news. "The Stoltzfus baby smiled at me," she announced breathlessly. "A real smile, not just gas like Mrs. Stoltzfus thought. And Rebecca says I'm a natural with babies, and maybe I'll be a midwife someday like Great-Aunt Mary was." "Is that what you want to be?" Claire asked, pulling her daughter onto her lap, despite Maisie's 8-year-old protests that she was too big for such things. "Maybe. Or maybe I'll be a nurse like you, Mom. Or maybe I'll do something completely different that nobody's thought of yet." Maisie's eyes sparkled with the unlimited possibilities that childhood offered. "The important thing is that I'll do it here, with our people. Our people." The phrase caught Claire's heart the way it always did. Maisie had claimed this community and this life with the wholehearted enthusiasm that only children could manage. There was no looking back for her, no regret for the urban life they'd left behind. This was home, complete and permanent and perfect. "What are you smiling about, Mom?" Maisie asked, studying Claire's face with the perception that had started. "This whole journey. I'm smiling because I'm thinking about how smart you were that day. You told Eli I needed someone kind and he needed a wife." "I was pretty smart, wasn't I?" Maisie agreed without false modesty. "But mostly I was just paying attention. Adults sometimes forget to pay attention to the important things." As Eli's laughter filled the kitchen and Maisie launched into a detailed description of her morning's adventures, Claire realized her daughter was right. She'd spent years not paying attention to what mattered most, not to her own needs, not to the possibilities for happiness that surrounded her, not to the simple truth that love was abundant rather than scarce. Now, at 44, she was finally paying attention to the way morning light slanted across her kitchen table, to the sound of Eli humming as he prepared for his day's work, to the complete security in Maisie's voice when she spoke of their future. She was paying attention to the gift of ordinary days in an extraordinary life, to the miracle of second chances, and to the infinite capacity of the human heart to heal, to hope, and to love again. Outside the window, the Pennsylvania countryside stretched toward the horizon, beautiful in its simplicity and abundance. It was a landscape of gentle hills and productive fields, of communities bound together by faith and mutual care, of lives lived at the pace of seasons rather than clocks. It was home, finally completely joyfully home,